The winter night covered the medieval kingdom in silence. Far away from modern cities, a huge stone castle stood beneath the cold sky. Its tall towers, thick walls, and dark corridors protected the royal family from enemies. During the day, the castle was full of life. Servants prepared meals, knights guarded the gates, and nobles discussed the future of the kingdom. But when the sun disappeared, everything became different. The great halls became quiet. The candles became the only light. The cold wind moved through the narrow windows, reminding everyone that a castle was built for protection, not comfort. Inside one of the most protected chambers lived the queen. People outside the castle imagined a queen's life as a dream. They saw the beautiful dresses, golden jewelry, royal celebrations, and the respect that came with a crown. But behind those beautiful images was a much harder reality. A medieval queen had to survive freezing nights, political struggles, and endless expectations. Even the richest women in the kingdom could not escape the challenges of medieval life. The castle walls were strong against enemies, but they also held the cold inside. There were no modern heaters, no warm rooms controlled by machines, and no easy way to escape the winter air. The queen's chamber was decorated with expensive fabrics and tapestries. These decorations showed wealth, but they also helped block some of the cold from the stone walls. Her bed was the most important part of the room. Royal beds were large, carefully designed, and surrounded by thick curtains. The curtains created a smaller space where warmth could stay longer during the night. Heavy wool blankets and fur coverings helped protect the queen from the freezing temperature. Still, sleeping in a medieval castle was not peaceful like people imagine today. The queen could hear guards walking through the halls, wooden doors opening and closing, and the wind moving around the ancient walls. Her nights were filled with thoughts about duty and responsibility. Many queens were married for political reasons. Their marriages created alliances between kingdoms and helped strengthen royal power. Some young women arrived at unfamiliar castles, surrounded by strangers, and had to learn how to survive in a dangerous world. A queen needed intelligence, patience, and courage. The royal court was not only a place of luxury, it was also a place of secrets, rumors, and competition. A single mistake could damage a queen's reputation. Behind every crown was a human story. These women experienced happiness, sadness, love, fear, and loneliness. They were not just figures from history books. They were people who lived through difficult times. As the fire slowly burned in the chamber, the queen rested beneath heavy blankets and waited for morning. Outside, the cold wind continued. Inside, a woman carried the weight of a crown. And this was only the beginning of the hidden world of medieval queens. The castle slowly awakened with the first light of morning. The guards changed their positions along the walls. Servants carried water through the corridors. The smell of fresh bread and burning wood began to fill the halls. For the queen, another day of royal duty had started. Her life followed a strict routine. Every hour had a purpose. Meetings, ceremonies, religious duties, and conversations with important nobles filled her days. A queen was expected to represent grace and wisdom. She needed to show kindness to visitors, respect to nobles, and loyalty to the king. Her behavior was always noticed because she was not only a person, she was a symbol of the kingdom itself. But behind this public image was a private world that few people understood. Many queens experienced loneliness. They lived among hundreds of people, yet finding someone they could truly trust was difficult. The castle was full of secrets. Servants carried messages. Nobles competed for influence. Families searched for ways to increase their power. A queen had to carefully choose every friendship and every word she spoke. The cold environment of medieval castles also shaped daily life. Thick clothing was necessary, especially during winter. Queens wore multiple layers of fabric to stay warm, and their chambers were prepared with fires, curtains, and heavy blankets. Still, the cold remained a constant companion. The stone walls reminded everyone that life in the medieval world was very different from today. There were no modern comforts, no easy escape from harsh weather. People survived by adapting to their surroundings. For queens, survival required more than physical strength. They needed intelligence, patience, and the ability to handle pressure. Some queens became powerful advisors who influenced important decisions. Others protected their families during times of war. Some used diplomacy to prevent conflicts between kingdoms. Their stories show that medieval queens were not simply decorations beside kings. They were important figures who shaped history. As night returned once again, the queen entered her chamber and closed the heavy curtains around her bed. The fire created a gentle warmth. The castle became quiet, and another night began inside the frozen stone walls. The winter continued across the medieval kingdom. Snow covered the fields, and the castle stood like a silent giant above the frozen landscape. Inside the walls, life continued according to ancient traditions that had existed for generations. For the queen, each day brought new responsibilities. She was expected to be graceful during public appearances, wise during political discussions, and strong during difficult moments. The crown on her head represented honor, but it also carried pressure. A queen could not easily show fear. Even during times of uncertainty, she had to appear calm. The people of the kingdom looked toward her as a symbol of stability. Inside the castle, the queen's daily life was carefully organized. Servants helped prepare her clothing, meals, and personal items. Trusted attendants stayed close to her because royal women rarely lived completely alone. But having many people around did not always remove loneliness. The queen often lived far away from the family and friends she knew as a child. Many royal marriages separated women from everything familiar. They had to build a new life among strangers. The castle became both a home and a place of duty. The walls protected the queen from outside threats, but they also reminded her of the world she had left behind. At night, when the candles became smaller and the halls became quiet, she could finally think about her own feelings. She might remember her childhood. She might miss her homeland. She might wonder about the future. The stories of medieval queens are filled with moments like these, moments hidden behind royal ceremonies and official records. History often remembers their crowns and titles, but it rarely shows their private struggles. They lived in a world where power was dangerous, reputation was fragile, and every decision could have consequences. Some queens became respected leaders. Some became victims of political games. Some were remembered through rumors that lasted for centuries. But behind every story was a real woman trying to survive her time. And inside the cold stone castle, as another winter night arrived, the queen rested beneath heavy blankets while the wind moved around the ancient walls. The kingdom slept. The guards continued. The castle remained quiet beneath the cold winter sky. Long before modern comforts existed, people living inside medieval castles depended on simple methods to survive the harsh seasons. For queens, staying warm was not only about comfort, it was about endurance. The royal chamber was prepared carefully before night arrived. Servants brought fresh firewood for the fireplace. Thick fabrics were placed around the room to reduce the cold coming from the stone walls. The queen's bed was covered with layers of wool and heavy blankets. Every small detail mattered. A medieval winter could be long and unforgiving. The cold entered through windows, doors, and the smallest spaces in the walls. Even powerful rulers could not completely escape nature. But the queen had other challenges beyond the weather. Her position required constant attention. She had to attend ceremonies, meet important guests, and maintain relationships with powerful families. A queen's influence could affect the entire kingdom. A kind word could create friendship. A wrong decision could create conflict. This was why royal women were trained to understand manners, politics, and diplomacy from an early age. Many queens learned how to communicate carefully. They knew that speaking too much could create problems, but remaining silent could also weaken their influence. Life inside the royal court required balance. The queen needed to be respected without appearing threatening. She needed to support the king while also protecting her own position. She needed to create trust in a world where loyalty could change quickly. At night, when the castle finally became peaceful, the queen could escape the expectations placed upon her. Inside her chamber, Away from the public eye, she was no longer only a symbol of royalty. She was a person with thoughts, memories, and dreams. The flickering fire reflected against the stone walls as the queen prepared to sleep. Outside, the guards walked through the frozen courtyard. Inside, the heavy curtains around the bed blocked the cold air. Another night passed in the medieval castle, and behind the silence of those ancient walls, the hidden life of queens continued. The medieval castle stood quietly as another winter morning arrived. The first sounds of the day came from the lower halls. Servants prepared meals, guards changed shifts, and the sound of footsteps traveled through the cold stone corridors. For the queen, the morning brought another day of responsibility. Royal life followed strict traditions. A queen was expected to appear elegant, respectful, and confident. Her clothing, her words, and even her movements were carefully observed by everyone around her. But behind the beautiful appearance was a life filled with pressure. A queen's position depended on many things beyond her control. She had to maintain good relationships with nobles, support the king's decisions, and represent the strength of the royal family. In many cases, she also carried the responsibility of producing an heir. The future of a dynasty could depend on her. This expectation created enormous pressure. A queen was not judged only as a person. She was judged by what she could provide for the kingdom. Inside the castle, rumors moved quickly. A conversation between servants could become a story among nobles. A small disagreement could become a political problem. Because of this, queens had to be careful about whom they trusted. The royal court was a world of hidden games. Some people offered friendship because they truly cared. Others stayed close because they wanted power. A wise queen learned to recognize the difference. During quiet moments, she might look outside the castle window and watch the lands below. Villages, forests, and fields stretched across the kingdom she represented. From that height, everything looked peaceful. But she knew that beyond those walls were wars, disagreements, and struggles that could change everything. The castle protected her body, but it could not protect her from responsibility. When night returned, the queen once again entered her private chamber. The fire burned softly. The candles created shadows across the walls. The cold wind surrounded the castle, and as she rested beneath heavy blankets, another day of medieval royal life came to an end. A life filled with beauty, hardship, and secrets that history would remember for centuries. The winter nights inside the castle were long and quiet. After the final candles were lit and the servants left the royal chamber, the queen was finally alone with her thoughts. The castle that seemed powerful during the day felt completely different after dark. The massive halls became empty. The stone walls became colder. The sound of the wind became louder. For a medieval queen, nighttime was often the only moment when she could forget the expectations of the court. During the day, she belonged to the kingdom. At night, she became simply a person. She could think about her family, her past, and the uncertain future ahead. Many queens arrived at their new homes as strangers. They entered marriages that were arranged for political reasons, leaving behind everything they had known. A young woman could suddenly find herself living in a foreign castle, surrounded by people who expected her to represent power and perfection. Learning to survive in this world required patience. The queen had to understand the traditions of the court. She had to learn which nobles could be trusted. She had to discover how to influence decisions without creating enemies. Although kings often held the official power, queens could have a different kind of influence. Through advice, relationships, and diplomacy, many queens helped shape important events. Some supported peace between kingdoms. Some protected their families during dangerous times. Some became powerful figures whose names remained in history, but their lives were never simple. The same influence that made a queen respected could also make her a target. Enemies could spread rumors. Political opponents could question her actions. A single mistake could become a story repeated for generations. Inside the cold castle chamber, the queen understood that her crown was both a privilege and a burden. The golden symbol on her head represented power, but it also represented responsibility. As the fire slowly faded, the queen closed her eyes and listened to the quiet sounds of the medieval night. The guards continued their watch. The kingdom rested, and another hidden chapter of royal history disappeared into the darkness. The medieval castle continued its endless rhythm of life. Every morning brought new duties, and every night brought silence. For the queen, the castle was a place of both comfort and challenge. It protected her from enemies, but it also surrounded her with responsibilities she could never escape. The royal chamber remained one of the few places where she could find peace. Unlike the busy halls of the castle, this room allowed her a moment of privacy. Here, she could remove the heavy jewelry, relax after long ceremonies, and prepare for another difficult day. But even in this quiet place, the thoughts of duty remained. A queen's role was connected to the future of the kingdom. She was expected to create strong relationships with powerful families and help maintain stability. Her marriage was often more than a personal relationship. It was a political agreement. Kings and queens were expected to unite lands, protect alliances, and strengthen their family's position. Because of this, many royal marriages began without love and required years of adjustment. For a young queen entering a new castle, the first years could be extremely difficult. She had to understand a new culture. She had to gain the respect of people who already had their own loyalties. She had to prove that she was worthy of her crown. The castle was full of traditions. Meals followed strict rules. Meetings followed careful ceremonies. Even small actions could carry meaning. A queen learned that silence could sometimes be powerful, and a carefully chosen word could change a situation. Over time, some queens became skilled at navigating the complicated world of medieval politics. They learned how to negotiate. They learned how to build alliances. They learned how to survive. Their stories show that medieval queens were far more than figures standing beside kings. They were women who faced uncertainty with courage. They lived through cold winters, political struggles, and personal sacrifices. As another evening arrived, the queen returned to her chamber. The fireplace created a gentle warmth while the heavy curtains around her bed protected her from the cold. Outside, the castle walls stood against the darkness. Inside, another quiet night began, and the forgotten stories of medieval queens continued to unfold. The castle remained surrounded by the cold silence of winter. Beyond the walls, farmers worked through difficult seasons, travelers moved carefully along frozen roads, and soldiers protected the lands of the kingdom. Inside the castle, the queen continued her life between comfort and responsibility. Royal rooms were larger and more decorated than ordinary homes, but they were still part of the medieval world. Cold stone, limited light, and long winters affected everyone, even those who lived behind golden doors. The queen's servants played an important role in making life easier. They prepared clothing, carried messages, arranged meals, and helped maintain the royal chamber. Many servants spent years serving the same royal family and became trusted members of the household. However, the queen always had to remember that the castle was a place of politics. Every person around her had their own connections and interests. A servant might hear important conversations. A noble might seek personal advantage. A visitor might bring hidden intentions. Because of this, queens learned to be careful. They listened more than they spoke. They observed more than they revealed. This skill helped many royal women survive difficult situations. The queen also understood the importance of reputation. In medieval society, a person's name could determine their future. For a queen, reputation was even more valuable. Stories about her behavior could spread quickly throughout the kingdom. A generous act could make her loved. A mistake could create criticism. A rumor could become a weapon used by enemies. This was one of the hidden dangers of royal life. While people admired the queen's beauty and position, they often knew nothing about the pressure she carried. Behind the crown was a woman who had to make difficult choices. She had to balance kindness with caution. She had to balance loyalty with independence. She had to survive in a world where power could change quickly. As night arrived once again, the queen returned to her chamber. The fire burned softly, and the sound of the winter wind surrounded the castle. The kingdom slept beneath the dark sky, and inside the ancient walls, another story of medieval royal life continued. The castle walls had witnessed many generations of kings and queens. Every stone carried memories of celebrations, conflicts, and quiet moments that were never recorded in history books. For the queen living inside those walls, each day was another chapter in a life filled with both privilege and difficulty. The cold seasons were especially challenging. Winter could last for months, and the thick stone of the castle made the rooms feel colder as the days passed. The queen's attendants worked constantly to keep the chamber comfortable. They prepared fires, arranged blankets, and made sure warm clothing was ready. Small comforts mattered in the medieval world. A warm room, a soft blanket, or a quiet moment beside the fireplace could feel like a great luxury. But the queen's greatest challenges were not caused by the weather. They came from the world of power. A royal court was a place where friendships and rivalries existed together. Noble families competed for influence, and every decision made by the queen could affect the balance of power. She had to understand people quickly. She had to know when to speak and when to remain silent. She had to protect her family while supporting the kingdom. Many queens became skilled diplomats. They used conversations, kindness, and intelligence to solve problems without violence. Their influence was often hidden, but it was real. A queen might help create peace between powerful families. She might advise the king during difficult moments. She might support important decisions that changed the future of the kingdom. Yet, despite their influence, queens often faced unfair judgment. Their actions were watched closely. Their mistakes were remembered. Their private lives became subjects of gossip. History often focused on their beauty or scandals, but behind those stories were women who lived complicated lives. They faced fear. They experienced loneliness. They carried responsibilities that few people could understand. As another night covered the castle, the queen prepared for sleep. The fire slowly faded. The candles became smaller. The heavy curtains around her bed protected her from the cold air. Outside, the guards continued their work. The medieval castle stood beneath another cold and quiet morning. The queen began her day as she always did, surrounded by servants, royal traditions, and the endless expectations that came with her position. A queen's life was carefully controlled. Her schedule was not decided only by personal wishes. Every meeting, ceremony, and appearance had a purpose. She represented the royal family, and her actions could influence how people viewed the entire kingdom. The clothing she wore, the way she greeted visitors, and even the words she chose were important. In the royal court, nothing was completely private. Behind the beautiful halls and expensive decorations was a world where information was power. A message from another kingdom could change relationships. A conversation between nobles could create new alliances. A rumor could create danger. The queen had to understand this hidden world. She learned to observe people carefully and recognize their intentions. Some nobles offered genuine loyalty, while others wanted to use her position for their own goals. This made trust extremely valuable. For many queens, the hardest part of royal life was not the cold castle or the long ceremonies. It was the feeling of isolation. A queen could be surrounded by servants and still feel alone. She often lived far away from the people she loved and had to create a new life among strangers. The castle protected her from enemies, but it also separated her from the outside world. During quiet moments, she might look through the narrow windows and watch the kingdom below. She could see villages, forests, and fields stretching across the land. That view reminded her of the responsibility she carried. The people depended on the stability of the crown. The future of the royal family depended on her choices. As evening arrived, the queen returned to her chamber. The fire burned softly, creating warmth against the cold stone walls. Another night began. The castle became silent, and behind the closed doors of the royal chamber, the hidden life of medieval queens continued. The castle entered another peaceful night beneath the winter sky. The halls that were once filled with voices became silent. Only the guards walking through the corridors and the soft sound of burning wood could be heard. Inside the queen's chamber, the world felt smaller. The heavy curtains around the bed blocked the cold air. The fireplace created a gentle warmth, and the candlelight moved across the stone walls. This was the moment when the queen could finally escape the eyes of the court. During the day, she had to be a symbol of strength. At night, she could simply be herself. Many medieval queens carried memories of the lives they left behind. Some had grown up in distant kingdoms surrounded by familiar faces. After marriage, they entered a completely new world where every tradition and every person was different. Learning to survive required patience. A queen needed to understand the people around her. She needed to know who offered friendship and who wanted influence. The royal court was not always a place of kindness. Behind polite conversations, there could be competition and hidden ambitions. Queens who understood this could protect themselves and their families. Some became skilled negotiators. They used calm words instead of force. They helped solve disagreements between powerful groups and created stronger relationships between kingdoms. Their influence was often quiet, but it could shape important events. However, power also brought danger. A queen who became too influential could attract enemies. People who disliked her decisions might spread rumors or question her character. Throughout history, many royal women were remembered through stories that were not always fair. Some were praised, some were criticized, some were misunderstood. But behind every story was a real person living in a difficult time. As the night continued, the queen rested inside the cold castle. The world outside was dark and silent. The kingdom slept, and another forgotten moment of medieval history passed into the darkness. The castle awakened beneath a gray winter sky. The cold morning air moved through the stone corridors as servants began their daily work. Fires were prepared, meals were arranged, and the sounds of the royal household slowly returned. For the queen, another day of responsibility had begun. Her life was shaped by tradition. Every action had meaning, and every public appearance reminded people of the power of the crown. A queen was expected to be graceful, intelligent, and patient. She needed to welcome important guests, support royal decisions, and maintain respect among the nobles. But the reality behind her position was much more difficult. The royal court could be unpredictable. One day, a noble family might show loyalty. The next day, they might seek greater influence for themselves. A queen had to understand these changes and protect her position carefully. Many queens developed strong political skills. They learned how to listen. They learned how to negotiate. They learned how to influence decisions without appearing to challenge the king. Their power often existed quietly, hidden behind formal ceremonies and royal traditions. The castle itself also shaped their lives. The thick walls provided protection, but they also created distance from ordinary people. A queen could look down from a tower and see the kingdom she represented, but she rarely experienced the daily struggles of those living outside. Still, many queens cared deeply about their people. They supported religious works, helped establish charities, and used their position to bring attention to important causes. Their lives were not only about luxury, they carried responsibilities that affected thousands of others. When evening arrived, the queen returned to her private chamber. The fire warmed the room. The candles created soft shadows. The heavy curtains surrounded her bed. For a short time, the queen could rest away from the demands of the royal court. But tomorrow would bring new meetings, new decisions, and new challenges. Because behind every crown was a story of patience, survival, and hidden strength. The medieval castle remained quiet as winter continued across the kingdom. For the queen, life inside the castle was a mixture of comfort and difficulty. She lived among beautiful objects, expensive fabrics, and loyal servants. Yet she also faced problems that no amount of wealth could remove. The greatest challenge was responsibility. A queen was expected to protect the honor of her family and support the future of the kingdom. Her position was not only about living in luxury, it was about serving a purpose greater than herself. Every royal gathering required careful preparation. When visitors arrived, the queen had to show kindness and confidence. When nobles gathered, she had to understand their words and intentions. When problems appeared, she had to remain calm. The royal court was a place where appearances mattered. A smile could hide disagreement. Compliment could hide ambition. Promise could hide betrayal. Because of this, queens learned the importance of patience and observation. Many royal women became experts at understanding people. They noticed small changes in behavior and learned when to speak and when to remain silent. These skills helped them survive in a world where power could change quickly. Life in the castle also meant following strict traditions. Meals, ceremonies, and meetings happened according to ancient customs. Even the smallest actions could represent respect or authority. For a queen, personal freedom was limited. Her life belonged partly to the kingdom, but during quiet nights, when the castle rested beneath the darkness, she could find moments of peace. She would sit beside the fire, listen to the wind outside, and remember that beneath the crown she was still human. She had hopes, she had fears, she had dreams. The world saw a powerful queen, but inside the cold stone chamber was a woman trying to survive the challenges of her time. And as another winter night passed, the forgotten stories of medieval queens continued to unfold. The castle stood quietly as another day came to an end. The evening light disappeared behind the hills, leaving the ancient walls covered in darkness. Inside, servants finished their final tasks, guards prepared for the night, and the royal family returned to their private rooms. For the queen, nighttime was often the only moment of true silence. During the day, she belonged to the kingdom. Her presence was required at meetings, ceremonies, and important gatherings. People watched her carefully, searching for signs of weakness or strength. But inside her chamber, she could finally rest. The room was prepared carefully against the cold. The fireplace burned slowly, thick curtains surrounded the bed, and heavy blankets waited for the long winter night. These simple comforts were precious in the medieval world. A warm room was a luxury. A quiet moment was rare. A peaceful night was something to appreciate. Yet, even while resting, the queen carried thoughts about the future. She thought about her family. She thought about political problems. She thought about the people who depended on the stability of the crown. Royal life demanded constant awareness. A queen could not easily forget her position. Many queens used their influence in ways that history sometimes overlooked. They supported education, helped religious communities, advised rulers, and created connections between powerful families. Their influence was often hidden because they did not always hold official titles of command. But their voices mattered. A wise queen understood that power was not only about giving orders. Sometimes power came from patience, knowledge, and the ability to guide others. However, living in the royal court also carried risks. The same influence that made a queen valuable could make others jealous. Enemies could question her choices or spread stories to weaken her reputation. Throughout history, some queens became famous because of rumors and scandals. But behind those stories were real women living through complicated times. They faced challenges with limited choices and tried to survive in a world where every decision could change their future. As the fire slowly faded, the queen closed her eyes beneath the heavy blankets. Outside, the castle walls faced the cold wind. Inside, another quiet night passed, and the hidden world of medieval queens remained waiting to be discovered. The medieval castle continued to stand against the passing seasons. For centuries, these stone fortresses had protected royal families from enemies, but they also witnessed the quiet struggles of the people who lived inside them. Among them were the queens. Their lives were often remembered through grand ceremonies and royal portraits, but the reality was much more complex. A queen's day was filled with expectations. From the moment she woke, she was surrounded by duties. Servants prepared her clothing, messengers brought information, and members of the court waited for her attention. Even simple moments could become important. A conversation during breakfast could influence a relationship between families. A meeting in the afternoon could affect political decisions. A public appearance could change how people viewed the royal household. The queen always had to remember that she represented more than herself. She represented a dynasty. Inside the castle, she also had to manage relationships carefully. Nobles often competed for power, and some tried to gain the queen's support for their own goals. A wise queen learned to listen carefully and avoid unnecessary conflicts. Her greatest weapon was not a sword. It was understanding. Many queens became skilled at diplomacy. They helped create agreements, encouraged peace, and offered advice during difficult situations. Although their names were sometimes forgotten, their influence shaped important moments in history. But the castle could still feel lonely. At night, when everyone left the chamber, the queen was surrounded only by candlelight and the sound of the winter wind. She might think about her childhood home. She might remember people she had lost. She might wonder what the future would bring. The crown gave her status, but it also separated her from ordinary life. A queen lived. The castle walls watched another winter morning arrive. The cold air moved through the narrow passages, and the sound of servants preparing for the day slowly filled the halls. Life inside the castle followed a familiar pattern, but for the queen, every day brought new responsibilities. A queen was expected to be a symbol of stability. When visitors arrived, she welcomed them with kindness. When important families gathered, she represented the strength of the royal house. When the kingdom faced difficult moments, people looked toward the royal family for confidence. But behind this image of perfection was a woman who faced many uncertainties. The queen's position depended on relationships. She needed the support of nobles, the trust of her household, and the respect of the people around her. Building those relationships was not easy. The royal court was filled with ambition. Many nobles wanted influence. Many families wanted greater power. Some people offered friendship because they respected the queen, while others approached her because they wanted something in return. A wise queen learned to recognize the difference. She listened carefully. She watched quietly. She chose her allies with patience. Over time, some queens became powerful figures in their own right. They used diplomacy instead of force and helped guide important decisions behind the scenes. Their influence was often invisible, but it shaped the direction of kingdoms. However, the same power that made a queen respected could also make her a target. Enemies could spread rumors. Political rivals could question her choices. A queen's personal life could become a subject of public discussion. In the medieval world, reputation was one of the most valuable possessions a person could have. Once damaged, it was difficult to restore. As evening arrived, the queen returned to her private chamber. The fire created a soft glow against the stone walls. The heavy curtains around her bed protected her from the cold night air. For a brief moment, the noise of politics disappeared. Only the quiet castle remained. And beneath the frozen sky, another chapter of the hidden lives of medieval queens came to an end. Winter settled even deeper across the kingdom. Before sunrise, the castle was wrapped in silence. Frost covered the narrow windows, and a thin layer of snow rested on the rooftops. Only the guards, carrying lanterns through the darkness, disturbed the peaceful morning. Inside the royal chamber, the queen awoke before much of the castle. She stood beside the small window and looked across the sleeping land. Smoke rose from distant cottages where ordinary families were beginning their day. Their lives were difficult, yet in some ways they enjoyed a freedom that royalty could never have. The queen could not simply leave the castle whenever she wished. Every journey required guards. Every visit required careful planning. Every public appearance carried political meaning. Even a simple ride through the countryside could become an important event. The crown brought honor, but it also placed invisible walls around the person who wore it. As the morning continued, letters arrived from nearby lords and neighboring kingdoms. Some carried good news. Others spoke of disagreements, poor harvests, or growing tensions along distant borders. The queen listened carefully as each message was read aloud. She understood that peace was never guaranteed. A kingdom could change in a single season. That was why wise queens valued patience above pride. Quick decisions often created lasting problems. Careful decisions could protect a kingdom for years. When the sun finally climbed above the snowy hills, the castle came alive once again. Servants hurried through the halls, the kitchens filled with warmth. The bells echoed across the courtyard. Another ordinary day had begun. Yet behind every ordinary day was a queen quietly carrying extraordinary responsibilities, hidden beneath the weight of a simple golden crown. As evening settled over the kingdom, the castle grew quiet once again. The great hall, filled with conversation only hours before, slowly emptied. One by one, the nobles returned to their chambers, and the servants cleared away the remains of the evening meal. Outside, the cold wind swept across the stone walls. Inside, the queen walked through a long corridor lit by rows of flickering candles. Their gentle light danced across ancient stones that had stood for hundreds of years. Every hallway held memories. Some remembered joyful celebrations. Others remembered whispered secrets, political bargains, and unexpected betrayals. The castle was more than a home. It was a witness to history. The queen understood this better than anyone. She knew that today's decisions could become tomorrow's legends. A single promise might prevent a war. A single mistake might be remembered for generations. That knowledge stayed with her every day. When she reached her private chamber, the fire had already been prepared. The room was warmer than the hallway, but the chill of winter still lingered near the walls. She sat beside the fireplace and quietly watched the flames. For a few peaceful moments, there were no meetings, no ceremonies, and no political discussions. Only silence. It was during these quiet evenings that many queens found time to think. They reflected on the choices they had made and the challenges still ahead. Although history often remembers crowns, castles, and royal feasts, it rarely remembers these silent moments. Yet these quiet hours shaped the people behind the titles. As the fire slowly burned lower, the queen prepared for another cold night. Beyond the castle walls, the kingdom slept beneath a sky filled with stars. Inside, another forgotten chapter of medieval life quietly came to an end. Morning arrived beneath a sky of pale gray clouds. The castle slowly came to life as bells echoed through the courtyard. Stable workers fed the horses, cooks prepared the first meal of the day, and servants hurried through the halls before the royal household awakened. The queen followed the same routine she had known for years. Her day began with prayer, followed by reports from trusted advisors. News arrived from nearby villages, distant castles, and neighboring kingdoms. Some messages brought hope, while others carried warnings. No two mornings were ever the same. A peaceful week could suddenly be interrupted by illness, poor harvests, or political disputes. For that reason, the queen learned to remain calm. She understood that fear rarely solved problems. Patience often did. Throughout the day, visitors entered the castle seeking advice, permission, or support. Some were respected nobles. Others were merchants hoping to earn royal favor. Each conversation demanded careful attention. A careless promise could create trouble. A thoughtful answer could strengthen valuable friendships. By late afternoon, the castle grew quieter again. Sunlight faded across the high towers, casting long shadows over the snowy courtyard. The queen paused beside a narrow window, watching birds circle above the distant forest. For a brief moment, the kingdom seemed peaceful, but she knew appearances could be deceiving. Life in the medieval world changed quickly, and every season brought new challenges. As darkness returned, servants lit candles throughout the castle. The familiar glow filled the corridors once more. Another winter night had begun. The queen closed the door to her chamber, leaving behind the demands of the royal court for a few precious hours. Beyond the thick stone walls, the wind continued its endless journey across the kingdom, while history quietly waited for another page to be written. Winter refused to loosen its grip on the kingdom. A blanket of snow covered the roads, making travel slow and uncertain. Messengers often arrived late, their cloaks covered in ice, carrying news from distant towns and castles. The queen listened carefully to every report. She understood that even the smallest piece of information could become important. A poor harvest in one village might lead to hunger. A disagreement between two noble families could grow into something much larger. Life inside the castle depended on preparation. Food was stored for the long winter months. Firewood was carefully counted. Every resource had value because no one knew how long the cold season would last. The queen often visited the castle kitchens. She watched as bread was baked, meat was preserved, and barrels of grain were inspected. These simple tasks were rarely mentioned in royal records, yet they helped keep hundreds of people alive through the winter. A strong kingdom was built on ordinary work. The servants understood this. The cooks understood this. And so did the queen. Late in the afternoon, snow began to fall again. The castle towers slowly disappeared behind a curtain of white, and the courtyard became silent. From her window, the queen watched the snowfall without speaking. It reminded her that nature cared little for crowns or titles. Every person, whether king, queen, or farmer, lived beneath the same winter sky. As darkness settled across the land, candles were lit throughout the castle. The familiar glow returned to the stone halls, and another peaceful evening began. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the queen prepared for another long night, unaware that history still held many unexpected stories waiting beyond the castle walls. The castle was never completely silent. Even in the deepest hours of the night, someone was always awake. Guards walked along the walls with steady footsteps, their lanterns glowing against the darkness. In the kitchens, a few servants quietly prepared bread for the coming morning. Stable hands checked on the horses, making sure they stayed warm through the freezing night. The queen often noticed these small routines. They reminded her that a kingdom depended not only on kings and queens, but also on countless ordinary people whose names would never appear in history books. From her chamber window, she watched snowflakes drift through the cold air. The castle courtyard, busy only a few hours earlier, now rested beneath a blanket of white. Everything looked peaceful, yet the queen knew that peace could be fragile. Beyond the distant hills were rival kingdoms, uncertain alliances, and roads filled with travelers carrying news from every direction. A single message could change the future of the court overnight. That uncertainty became part of royal life. It taught patience. It taught caution. Most of all, it taught endurance. The queen returned to the fireplace and warmed her hands near the fading flames. Thick wool blankets and heavy curtains helped keep the room comfortable, but the cold never disappeared completely. It lingered inside the ancient stones, a quiet reminder of the harsh world outside. As the last candle burned lower, she offered a silent prayer for another peaceful dawn. Outside, the winter wind continued its endless journey across the kingdom. Inside the castle, another forgotten night slipped quietly into history. Part 23. The first light of dawn slowly reached the castle towers. A thin layer of frost covered the windows, turning the morning into a world of silver and white. From the highest tower, the guards could see smoke rising from distant villages as families began another cold day. The queen woke before sunrise. She preferred these quiet moments, when the castle had not yet filled with voices and footsteps. Standing near the window, she watched the frozen landscape stretch beyond the walls. It was easy to believe the kingdom was peaceful, but appearances often hid a different truth. Every village depended on a successful harvest. Every noble family protected its own interests. Every season brought new challenges that could change the lives of thousands. The queen understood that ruling was not only about ceremonies and crowns. It was about responsibility. After a simple morning meal, she met with her advisors. They discussed supplies for the winter, repairs to the castle walls, and reports from nearby lands. Some conversations were brief, while others lasted for hours. A wise queen listened more than she spoke. She knew that careful decisions often prevented greater problems in the future. By midday, sunlight warmed the courtyard just enough to melt the ice along the stone paths. Servants hurried between buildings, carrying baskets of firewood and fresh water before the cold returned. Life inside the castle never truly stopped. It simply moved at the slow rhythm of the seasons. As evening approached once again, the queen returned to her chamber. The fire was already burning. The heavy curtains were closed. Outside, another winter night settled over the kingdom. Inside, the castle prepared for another chapter in its long and quiet history. Part 23. The evening bells echoed across the castle just as the sun disappeared behind the snowy hills. One by one, the wooden doors were closed, and the drawbridge was raised above the icy moat. The fortress settled into its nightly routine, protected from the darkness beyond its walls. The queen walked slowly through the gallery, where colorful tapestries covered the cold stone. They showed scenes of great battles, royal weddings, and famous victories from long ago. She paused for a moment. Each tapestry told a story of glory, yet none revealed the ordinary days that filled a queen's life. The quiet mornings, the difficult decisions, or the lonely winter nights. History often remembered great events. It rarely remembered peaceful moments. Returning to her chamber, the queen found a letter waiting on the table. It had traveled for many days through snow and rain before reaching the castle. News from distant relatives always carried mixed emotions, reminding her of the home she had left behind years earlier. For a while, she sat beside the fireplace and read in silence. The flames crackled softly as the cold wind brushed against the narrow windows. Outside, snow continued to fall across the sleeping kingdom. Inside, the warmth of the fire created a small island of comfort within the ancient stone walls. As the final candle grew dim, the queen carefully folded the letter and placed it inside a wooden chest. Tomorrow would bring new duties, new conversations, new decisions. But tonight, the castle belonged to silence. And beneath the quiet winter sky, another forgotten evening faded gently into history. The castle welcomed another morning beneath the cold winter sky. The sound of bells marked the beginning of a new day. Servants moved through the halls, preparing the rooms and carrying supplies from one part of the castle to another. For the queen, every morning carried a reminder of duty. Her position gave her influence, but it also required constant attention. She had to think about the royal family, the kingdom, and the many people who depended on the stability of the crown. A queen's power was often quiet. She did not always command armies or make public speeches. Instead, she influenced through conversations, advice, and careful relationships. Many important decisions began with private discussions inside royal chambers. A few words from a queen could change the direction of a negotiation. A message sent by her could create peace between powerful families. Her intelligence was one of her greatest tools. But the royal court was never simple. Behind the beautiful clothing and respectful greetings were hidden ambitions. Some nobles wanted influence, and some waited for opportunities to increase their own power. The queen learned that patience was necessary. She watched carefully. She listened closely. She understood that every person around her had a story and a purpose. When evening arrived, she returned to her chamber and left the noise of the court behind. The fire burned gently against the cold. The thick curtains surrounded the bed. The ancient castle became quiet once again. As the queen rested, she knew that tomorrow would bring another day filled with challenges. Yet she also knew that strength was not always shown through battles. Sometimes strength was found in patience, wisdom, and the courage to continue. And inside the frozen stone castle, another night quietly passed. The winter winds continued to surround the ancient castle. For many people living outside the walls, the castle represented power and safety. Its towers reached toward the sky, and its strong gates protected those who lived inside. But for the queen, the castle was both a home and a responsibility. Every room carried memories. Every hallway held stories. Every stone had witnessed moments of joy and sorrow. The queen often walked through the quieter parts of the castle during the evening. Away from the crowded halls and royal meetings, she could think about the life she had built inside those walls. She remembered the years when she first arrived. Everything had been unfamiliar. The language, the traditions, the faces of the people around her. Over time, the strange castle became a place she understood. She learned the habits of the court and discovered how to survive among powerful families. A A queen needed more than beauty to succeed. She needed wisdom. She needed courage. She needed the ability to remain calm when others lost control. The medieval world was unpredictable. A peaceful kingdom could suddenly face conflict, and a trusted ally could become a rival. That was why queens valued loyalty above almost everything else. At night, the queen returned to her chamber and looked at the fire glowing in the fireplace. The warmth was comforting, but she knew the cold outside would return again. Like winter, the challenges of royal life never truly disappeared. They only changed. The queen closed the heavy curtains around her bed and listened to the quiet sounds of the castle. The guards continued their watch. The wind moved across the towers. The kingdom rested beneath the stars. And another hidden moment from the life of a medieval queen slowly became part of history. Part 27. The castle entered another quiet winter evening. The long corridors were almost empty, and the sound of footsteps echoed against the stone walls. The daily activities of the royal household had ended, leaving only the soft glow of candles and the warmth of small fires. For the queen, these peaceful hours were often the most meaningful. During the day, she belonged to the kingdom. She attended meetings, welcomed visitors, and carried the image of royal strength. But at night, she could finally reflect on her own thoughts. She often remembered the journey that brought her to the castle. Many queens had left their childhood homes when they were very young. They traveled across unfamiliar lands to begin new lives among strangers. The journey itself could take weeks or even months, filled with uncertainty and fear. Arriving at a new castle meant learning a completely different world. The people spoke differently. The customs were unfamiliar. The expectations were enormous. A young queen had to adapt quickly because everyone was watching her. Over time, some queens found ways to create their own influence. They supported artists, encouraged learning, helped religious communities, and used their position to improve life around them. Their achievements were sometimes hidden behind the achievements of kings, but their contributions were important. The queen understood that true power was not always loud. Sometimes it existed in quiet conversations. Sometimes it appeared through patience. Sometimes it was shown by helping others during difficult times. As the night grew colder, servants added more wood to the fireplace. The queen rested beside the warm glow and listened to the peaceful sounds of the castle. Outside, the winter wind continued across the kingdom. Inside, another quiet night passed behind the thick stone walls, and the forgotten stories of medieval queens continued to survive through time. The castle entered another quiet winter evening. The long corridors were almost empty, and the sound of footsteps echoed against the stone walls. The daily activities of the royal household had ended, leaving only the soft glow of candles and the warmth of small fires. For the queen, these peaceful hours were often the most meaningful. During the day, she belonged to the kingdom. She attended meetings, welcomed visitors, and carried the image of royal strength. But at night, she could finally reflect on her own thoughts. She often remembered the journey that brought her to the castle. Many queens had left their childhood homes when they were very young. They traveled across unfamiliar lands to begin new lives among strangers. The journey itself could take weeks or even months, filled with uncertainty and fear. Arriving at a new castle meant learning a completely different world. The people spoke differently. The customs were unfamiliar. The expectations were enormous. A young queen had to adapt quickly because everyone was watching her. Over time, some queens found ways to create their own influence. They supported artists, encouraged learning, helped religious communities, and used their position to improve life around them. Their achievements were sometimes hidden behind the achievements of kings, but their contributions were important. The queen understood that true power was not always loud. Sometimes it existed in quiet conversations. Sometimes it appeared through patience. Sometimes it was shown by helping others during difficult times. As the night grew colder, servants added more wood to the fireplace. The queen rested beside the warm glow and listened to the peaceful sounds of the castle. Outside, the winter wind continued across the kingdom. Inside, Another quiet night passed behind the thick stone walls, and the forgotten stories of medieval queens continued to survive through time. The castle stood beneath a sky filled with winter clouds. The cold season had changed the rhythm of life across the kingdom. Roads became harder to travel, messages arrived slowly, and everyone inside the castle learned the importance of preparation. The queen understood this better than most. A royal household depended on careful planning. Food had to be stored, supplies had to be protected, and servants had to work together to keep the castle running. Even small mistakes could create problems during the harsh months. The queen often heard reports from different parts of the kingdom. She learned about villages, farms, and the challenges faced by ordinary people. Although she lived behind castle walls, she knew that the strength of a kingdom came from those who worked beyond them. Farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, and servants all played important roles. The crown could not survive without them. This understanding shaped the way many queens viewed their responsibilities. They were not only members of a royal family, they were guardians of a tradition that connected thousands of lives. In the afternoon, the queen met with several members of the court. They discussed important matters while snow fell quietly outside the windows. Every person in the room had their own opinions and ambitions. The queen listened carefully before giving her thoughts. She had learned that wisdom often came from patience. A rushed decision could create problems. A thoughtful decision could protect the future. When night arrived, the castle became peaceful again. The queen returned to her chamber, where the fireplace created a gentle warmth against the cold stone walls. She looked around the room and remembered how different this place had felt when she first arrived. Years had passed. The castle was no longer unfamiliar. It had become part of her story, and as the flames slowly faded, another winter night disappeared into the quiet pages of history. The castle woke beneath another cold morning. Snow rested on the rooftops, and the frozen courtyard reflected the pale sunlight. The guards opened the gates carefully as servants began their daily work inside the fortress. For the queen, the day started with familiar responsibilities. She received reports, listened to advisors, and prepared for meetings with important members of the court. Royal life required constant attention. A queen could not ignore small details because small details often became larger problems. A disagreement between nobles could become a serious conflict. A delayed message could affect an alliance. A careless word could damage a relationship that took years to build. The queen understood the importance of patience. She had learned that power was not only about giving commands. True influence came from understanding people. Throughout history, many queens used their intelligence to guide decisions without standing in the center of attention. Their advice was often given privately, but its effects could be felt across the kingdom. They helped create agreements, supported families, and protected the traditions of their royal houses. However, life at court was never completely safe. The same people who praised a queen today could criticize her tomorrow. Trust had to be earned slowly. As evening approached, the queen returned to her chamber. The familiar warmth of the fireplace welcomed her after the cold corridors. She removed the symbols of her public role and enjoyed a rare moment of quiet. Outside, the wind moved around the towers. Inside, the candlelight reflected against the ancient walls. The queen rested beneath heavy blankets, knowing another day would soon arrive with new challenges. The castle slept, the kingdom waited, and another hidden story from the world of medieval queens continued. The winter night covered the medieval kingdom in darkness. Inside the castle, the final candles burned softly as servants completed their last tasks. The great halls became empty, and the sound of voices slowly disappeared. The queen returned to her chamber, where the fireplace created a small circle of warmth. After a long day of meetings and responsibilities, these quiet moments were precious. She removed her royal jewelry and placed it carefully on a wooden table. Without the crown and the formal clothing, she looked less like a powerful ruler and more like an ordinary person searching for peace. This was the side of queens that history often forgot. They were not only symbols, They were mothers, daughters, wives, and individuals with their own emotions. Many queens carried private worries that no one at court could see. They worried about their children. They worried about political changes. They worried about enemies who watched their every move. The medieval world was unpredictable, and royal families were often surrounded by danger. A queen learned to be strong because weakness could be costly. She learned to remain calm during difficult conversations. She learned to hide fear when others were watching. She learned that survival sometimes depended on patience. Outside the chamber, the castle guards continued their nightly patrols. The thick walls protected everyone inside, but the cold still found its way through small openings. The queen pulled the heavy blankets closer and listened to the distant sounds of the fortress. The wind, the footsteps, the crackling fire. These sounds had become familiar companions. As her eyes slowly closed, another day of medieval royal life came to an end. The crown rested nearby. The castle remained silent, and the forgotten stories of queens continued waiting in the shadows of history. The castle stood quietly as another winter morning arrived. The first sounds of life came from the lower floors. Servants carried supplies, cooks prepared meals, and guards walked along the walls watching over the frozen land. Inside the royal chamber, the queen prepared for another day. Years of experience had taught her how to survive the complicated world of the court. She understood that being a queen was not only about wearing a crown. It was about responsibility. It was about patience. It was about making difficult choices when others depended on her. During the morning meetings, the queen listened to reports from different parts of the kingdom. Some villages needed support after harsh weather. Some nobles requested assistance with local problems. Every decision required careful thought. A queen had to consider the present, but she also had to think about the future of her family, the future of her kingdom, the future of her people. After the meetings ended, she walked through the castle halls. The walls were decorated with paintings, tapestries, and symbols of past rulers. Each generation had left something behind. The queen knew that one day her own story would become part of that history. But she also knew that history did not always remember people fairly. Many queens were judged by rumors rather than truth. Their choices were sometimes misunderstood. Their struggles were often forgotten. Yet behind every royal title was a human life filled with emotions and challenges. As evening arrived, snow began falling again. The queen returned to her chamber and watched the white landscape outside the window. The castle looked peaceful. The kingdom looked quiet, but she knew that every peaceful moment was something to value. The fire burned gently beside her. The curtains closed around her bed. Another cold night began inside the ancient stone castle, and another chapter of medieval history quietly continued. The castle remained surrounded by the quiet beauty of winter. Snow covered the fields beyond the walls, and the frozen landscape seemed endless. From the highest tower, the kingdom looked peaceful, but inside the castle, life continued with its usual challenges. The queen understood that appearances could be misleading. A beautiful castle did not mean an easy life. A golden crown did not remove fear. A position of power did not guarantee happiness. Every morning, the queen faced the same responsibility of protecting her family's future and maintaining the respect of those around her. Over the years, she had learned the hidden language of the royal court. A pause during a conversation could reveal doubt. A simple gesture could show loyalty. A carefully chosen sentence could prevent conflict. These skills were necessary for survival. Many people believed queens simply enjoyed luxury, but their lives required constant awareness. They had to balance kindness with caution and trust with careful judgment. In the afternoon, the queen spent time with her attendants. They discussed clothing, household matters, and news from different parts of the kingdom. These conversations might seem ordinary, but they helped the queen understand what was happening around her. The voices of servants often revealed things that official reports did not. As night approached, the castle slowly became quiet. The queen returned to her chamber, where the fire was already burning. She sat near the flames and reflected on the years she had spent behind those stone walls. The castle was no longer just a place of duty. It had become a witness to her entire journey. It had seen her fears. It had seen her victories. It had seen her grow stronger. Outside, the winter wind moved across the towers. Inside, the queen rested beneath warm blankets. Another night passed quietly, carrying away another forgotten moment from the life of a medieval queen. The medieval castle welcomed another quiet morning. The winter sun appeared slowly above the horizon, touching the towers with a faint golden light. Inside the walls, servants began their daily tasks, preparing the castle for another day of royal life. The queen started her morning by reviewing the latest news from across the kingdom. Messages arrived from distant villages, noble families, and neighboring lands. Each letter carried information that could influence important decisions. A queen learned that ruling was often about listening. She listened to advisors. She listened to messengers. She listened to the concerns of people around her. Through careful attention, she gained knowledge that helped her survive in the complicated world of medieval politics. The royal court was never simple. Behind every celebration and ceremony were hidden relationships and personal ambitions. Some people wanted peace, while others searched for opportunities to increase their own power. The queen had to recognize these differences. She knew that true strength was not always shown through authority. Sometimes it was shown through wisdom and patience. During the afternoon, she walked through the castle gardens. Even in winter, the garden remained a place of calm. Snow covered the paths, and the quiet beauty of nature offered a brief escape from royal duties. For a moment, she was not thinking about politics. She was simply enjoying the peaceful silence. As evening arrived, the queen returned inside. The familiar warmth of the fireplace welcomed her. The heavy stone walls surrounded the chamber, protecting her from the cold night outside. She looked around the room and remembered all the years she had spent there. The castle had changed. She had changed, but the responsibilities of the crown remained the same. Another night began, and behind the ancient walls, another forgotten story of medieval queens continued. The castle stood beneath a dark winter sky. The cold wind moved around the towers, carrying the sounds of the distant forest. Inside, the royal household continued its careful routine, preparing food, maintaining fires, and protecting the comfort of those who lived within the walls. The queen had learned that a castle was not only built from stone. It was built from the work of many people. Every servant, guard, and worker played a role in keeping the kingdom alive. Without them, even the strongest fortress would become silent. This understanding made many queens value the people around them. They knew that leadership was not only about power, but also about responsibility. During the evening, the queen met with trusted advisors. They discussed matters that required patience and careful thinking. Some problems had simple solutions, while others required time. The queen never rushed important decisions. She had seen how quickly a small disagreement could become a serious conflict. Years inside the royal court had taught her one important lesson. Words could be as powerful as weapons. A respectful conversation could create peace. A careless statement could create enemies. Later that night, she returned to her private chamber. The fire was burning softly, and the room was filled with the gentle sound of crackling wood. Outside, snow covered the castle grounds. The queen sat quietly, thinking about the journey that had brought her there. She had entered the castle as a stranger. Now, those same walls carried memories of her life. The celebrations, the struggles, the moments of happiness and sorrow. As the candles slowly faded, the queen prepared for sleep. The castle became silent once again, and beneath the frozen sky, another hidden chapter of medieval history disappeared into the night. The winter season slowly continued across the medieval kingdom. The castle remained strong against the cold winds, but inside its walls, every person felt the challenges of the harsh weather. Fires needed constant attention, supplies needed careful management, and every room required preparation. The queen understood these struggles well. She knew that royal comfort depended on the work of many people. The warmth of her chamber came from servants who carried firewood. The food on her table came from workers who prepared and stored supplies. A kingdom was built by many hands. During the day, the queen continued her meetings and duties. She spoke with advisors, listened to reports, and considered decisions that could affect the future of the realm. She had learned that patience was one of the greatest strengths a ruler could have. Not every problem could be solved immediately. Not every disagreement required force. Sometimes waiting for the right moment was the wisest choice. As the years passed, the queen became more experienced in understanding people. She recognized the difference between honest advice and hidden ambition. She knew that some smiles were genuine, while others concealed personal goals. This knowledge helped her protect herself and her family. When evening arrived, the queen returned to her chamber. The familiar glow of the fireplace filled the room. The heavy curtains around her bed created a small place of warmth within the cold stone castle. She looked toward the window and watched snow falling silently over the kingdom. The world outside seemed peaceful. For a moment, she forgot the pressures of the crown. She was simply a person watching the beauty of winter. As the night grew deeper, the castle rested. The guards continued their watch. The fires slowly burned. And another quiet chapter from the hidden life of medieval queens passed into history. The castle entered another peaceful winter evening. The final sounds of the day slowly disappeared. Servants returned to their rooms. The great hall became empty, and the only movement came from guards walking through the dark corridors. For the queen, these quiet hours were a rare gift. During the day, she carried the image of royalty. She attended meetings, greeted visitors, and represented the strength of the kingdom. But at night, she could step away from that role for a short time. Inside her chamber, the fire created a warm glow against the cold stone walls. The queen sat near the flames and reflected on the years she had spent inside the castle. She remembered the uncertainty of her early days. She remembered arriving in a place where everything felt unfamiliar. She remembered learning how to survive among powerful people. The journey had not been easy. A queen needed courage to face a world where every decision could be judged. She needed wisdom to understand people and patience to handle difficult situations. Over time, she became stronger. She learned that influence did not always come from commanding others. Sometimes it came from kindness. Sometimes it came from knowledge. Sometimes it came from knowing when to remain silent. Outside, the winter wind moved across the towers. The castle stood as it had for generations, protecting secrets that would never appear in official records. Many ordinary moments disappeared with time. A quiet conversation, a thoughtful decision, a lonely night beside the fireplace. Yet these moments were part of the true story of medieval queens. As the candles burned lower, the queen prepared for sleep. Another day had ended. Another memory had been created inside the ancient stone walls. And the hidden world behind the crown continued. The castle rested beneath a sky filled with winter stars. The cold air surrounded the ancient walls, but inside the fortress, life continued quietly. The fires burned throughout the rooms, protecting the people from the freezing nights. The queen had spent many years learning the rhythm of castle life. She understood the sounds around her, the footsteps of guards, the movement of servants, the closing of heavy wooden doors. Each sound had become familiar. The castle was no longer only a place of stone and duty. It was a place filled with memories. During the day, the queen continued to guide and support the royal household. She knew that her actions influenced more than just her own life. A queen's choices could affect families, alliances, and the future of the kingdom. This responsibility was heavy, but she carried it with patience. She had learned that history was not only created on battlefields. Sometimes history was shaped through quiet conversations in royal chambers. Sometimes it was shaped by the decisions made during peaceful evenings. The queen understood the importance of these hidden moments. As night arrived, she returned to her private room. The fireplace gave a gentle warmth, and the heavy curtains around her bed protected her from the cold air. She looked around the chamber and thought about everything those walls had witnessed. Years of celebrations, years of challenges, years of change. The world outside would continue to move forward, but the castle would remain, holding the memories of those who lived inside. The queen closed her eyes as the sound of the winter wind filled the night. Another peaceful evening passed, and another forgotten story from the world of medieval queens quietly remained in history. The medieval castle welcomed another silent morning. The first light touched the tall towers, and the frozen landscape slowly came alive. Servants opened the doors, guards changed their positions, and the royal household prepared for another day. The queen had learned that every morning brought new possibilities. Some days were filled with celebrations. Others brought difficult decisions, but every day required strength. She walked through the castle halls, observing the place that had become her home. The stone walls, wooden doors, and old decorations reminded her of the many generations that had lived before her. Kings and queens had walked these same paths. They had faced the same cold winters. They had carried the same hopes and fears. The queen knew she was only one chapter in a much longer story. During the afternoon, she met with members of the court. They discussed the future of the kingdom and the challenges ahead. The queen listened carefully before sharing her thoughts. Experience had taught her that wisdom often came from understanding different opinions. A ruler who only spoke could miss important details. A ruler who listened could discover better solutions. As evening approached, the castle became peaceful again. The queen returned to her chamber and watched the sunset disappear behind the distant hills. The sky changed colors, and for a brief moment, the world outside looked calm and beautiful. She thought about her journey, the fears she had overcome, the lessons she had learned, the people who had helped her along the way. The crown had brought responsibility, but it had also given her a chance to leave a mark on history. As darkness covered the kingdom, the fireplace continued to burn. The castle rested, and another quiet night passed behind the frozen stone walls. The final days of winter slowly approached the medieval kingdom. The snow began to melt in some areas, and the frozen fields slowly prepared for the return of spring. Inside the castle, people noticed the small changes that came with the changing season. For the queen, every season carried different memories. Winter reminded her of quiet nights beside the fireplace, long thoughts in silent chambers, and the challenges of surviving behind stone walls. Spring brought new responsibilities. The kingdom would become active again. Travelers would return to the roads. Nobles would visit the castle. New decisions would need to be made. The queen understood that life never remained still. Throughout her years inside the castle, she had learned many lessons. She learned that power required responsibility. She learned that patience could be stronger than anger. She learned that even the most powerful people carried private struggles. The world often saw only the crown. It rarely saw the person beneath it. The queen looked around her chamber one final time before preparing for another evening. The fireplace still created warmth. The candles still painted shadows on the walls. The heavy curtains still protected the bed from the cold. These simple things had become part of her life. Outside, the castle guards continued their watch. The kingdom rested peacefully, and inside the ancient fortress, another chapter of medieval history moved quietly toward its ending. The stories of queens, castles, and forgotten knights remained alive through the centuries, because behind every crown was not only power, there was a human story. The final winter night arrived over the medieval castle. The towers stood beneath the dark sky, just as they had for countless generations. The stone walls had protected kings, queens, servants, and soldiers through years of change. Inside the castle, the queen sat beside the fireplace and looked back on her journey. She remembered the first day she entered those walls. A young woman in an unfamiliar world, a stranger among powerful families, someone who had to learn how to survive. Over time, the castle became more than a place of duty. It became her home. She learned the secrets of the court. She learned the importance of patience. She learned that true strength was not always shown through power, but through wisdom and endurance. The stories of medieval queens are often filled with crowns, celebrations, and scandals. But behind those stories were real people, women who faced cold winters, women who carried heavy responsibilities, women who lived through uncertain times. They slept beneath layers of blankets inside freezing stone castles, not because they were powerless, but because they belonged to a world very different from our own. Their lives were shaped by the limits of their time, yet many found ways to influence history. Some created peace, some protected their families, some changed the future of their kingdoms. As the fire slowly faded, the queen closed her eyes. Outside, the wind moved gently across the towers. The guards continued their final patrol.